On September 7th, 1991, a new animated series debuted on Fox Kids called Little Shop, pulling inspiration from the hit musical released 5 years earlier. This little remembered show lasted only 12 episodes, but is a piece of an extremely strange history of Saturday morning cartoons being based on PG-13 and R-rated properties. Things got so insane that at one point they were even looking to produce a cartoon called Operation Aliens, inspired by the upcoming Alien 3 film. While this project never came to be, it did give us an awesome toy line. This is Scott Rogers from Geekscape.net and the Horror Movie Night podcast, and these are the top 10 kids cartoons based on adult franchises. Before we get started, a quick reminder to subscribe to our channel for more pop culture-based videos coming out every Tuesday, and donate to our Patreon page to get early access to the videos and bonus podcasts. Number 10, Beetlejuice. We are keeping this one low on the list since outside of some cartoonish violence, macabre humor, and one-sentence Beetlejuice is a fairly tame PG-13 to begin with. The show, which also premiered in 1991, tonally fits the humor of the Tim Burton classic. The show eliminates the recently deceased Maitlands and changes Lydia and Beetlejuice's relationship, but most of the show took place in the netherworld where they were able to insert as much gross-out humor as they wanted. The show was a massive hit, running for 94 episodes over 4 seasons and directly introducing many kids of the 90s to this late 80s classic. Number 9, Little Shop. Little Shop's anniversary may have been the key inspiration to this video, but in the grand scheme of what else is on this list, Little Shop is fairly tame. The show is extremely loosely based on the 60s Corman cult classic and the 80s musical blockbuster, but it's more inspired by name than anything else. With the series Little Shop, we follow the teenager named Seymour, who plants an ancient seed that grows into the talking plant named Junior. Junior did not request Seymour to murder anyone for his survival, but instead would rap advice to help Seymour and his friends solve whatever problems they might be facing in that episode. After 12 episodes, the show was quickly canceled and even more quickly forgotten. Number 8, Police Academy, the series. Yes, the Police Academy films are extremely dumb films, more remembered for being a punchline than a franchise anyone took seriously, so who cares if they made a kid's cartoon out of it. The later Police Academy films became more directed at kids anyway, but the first film is basically Animal House or Caddyshack with police recruits. The fact that Police Academy could be turned into a kid's cartoon with a toy line means that if the show was a little more popular, the Delta House cartoon could have been a reality for us. The show takes place between Part 4, Citizens on Patrol, and Part 5, Assignment Miami Beach, and featured all of the franchise favorites, now fully fledged police officers fighting comic book level crooks like Lockjaw, the Clown Gang, and the Phantom of the Opera. The show was popular enough for there to be 65 episodes across 2 seasons and even received a 6-issue comic book through Marvel. Number 7, Highlander, the animated series. At some point in the early 90s, someone watched Highlander, a film basically known for decapitation, and thought, we could market this to kids. Unlike a lot of the previous shows we've named that avoided being too directly tied to the source material, Highlander, the animated series, did not shy away from its origins. The show takes place in the distant future with Duncan, the ancestor from the film's main character, Connor MacLeod, trying to defeat an evil dictator. While the show contained a dramatically lower number of decapitations than the original 1986 film, it also didn't shy away from violence being more adult than other kids' cartoons at that time. Number 6, Conan the Adventurer. It's been a few years since I watched the Conan movies, but I primarily remember a lot of gore and even more boobs. It definitely wasn't a movie where I thought, I can't wait to show this to my son one day. Conan's origins go as far back as 1932, when Robert E. Howard's creation first appeared in Weird Tales and has been adapted multiple times, most famously in the Arnold Schwarzenegger films of the early 80s. The cartoon did receive slight praise for not just capturing elements of Howard's original stories, but also abandoning the violence with modern morality tales. Ultimately, it was canceled after 2 seasons, a common thread so far with most of these shows, but did have a short-lived continuation with a spin-off series called Conan and the Young Adventurers. Number 5, Robocop, the animated series. Paul Verhoeven's 1987 film is a satirical science fiction masterpiece packed with violence and debauchery. While the franchise slowly became more kid-friendly, with the 3rd film even featuring a child sidekick, most people forget that the animated series came out the year after the original film. This means any kid who adored this cartoon during its short 12-episode run, who was curious about what exactly happened to Officer Alex Murphy to turn him into Robocop, was in for a rude awakening when they convinced their parents just to rent the VHS for them. To the show's benefit, it actually did very little to tone down the violence of the movie, just replacing gun bullets with lasers. This also led to some mild praise for the show writing ability to keep its storytelling fairly complex and high level compared to other kids' entertainment at that time. Number 4. Tales from the Cryptkeeper. In the 1950s, EC Comics had to prove that their comics Vault of Horror and Tales from the Crypt weren't warping the youth's minds. So it seemed almost poetic that 40 years later it was turned into a Saturday morning cartoon aimed specifically towards kids. Thanks to movies like Hammer's films based on the series and the Creepshow franchise, the surprisingly short-lived comic series continues to be popular in people's memory banks, leading to the HBO series debut in 1989. The show became an unexpected juggernaut of depraved humor and extreme violence, and when something is that popular, why not make a kids spin-off series out of it? ABC added it to its Saturday morning children's block, and while less violent than what was being shown on HBO, episodes still needed to be approved by child psychiatrists before airing on the channel. It was canceled after its 2-season run, with CBS reviving it under the name The New Tales from the Crypt 6 years later. However, with stricter guidelines and even tamer stories, the show only lasted 13 episodes before being canceled a second time. Number 3. Rambo, The Force of Freedom. As a kid, I would listen to the kids on the recess yard describe things that happened in R-rated movies that were so graphic that I remember them in detail now. So much so that when I was old enough to watch the movies in my teen years, I quickly realized that the kids on the recess yard had not actually seen the films. Things I was told about what happened in the Rambo movies sounded so horrible that I actively avoided the cartoon series as a kid. It's easy to see the appeal of turning Rambo into a cartoon. At the time, G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, was helping action figures fly off of shelves, so obviously other animation studios were on the search for well-established war franchises for kids. Honestly, in the long run, turning Rambo into a kid's cartoon character isn't any more disrespectful than taking a film about the psychological damages of war trauma and turning it into pop culture action heroes armed to the teeth with ammo. Number 2. Roughnecks, Starship Troopers Chronicles. In case this was lost on the people who made the Robocop cartoon series, Paul Verhoeven films really shouldn't be kids' cartoons. If this short-lived series were more successful, I wonder if the Showgirls cartoon would have begun production. The Starship Troopers film took an extremely poor war book and turned it into an anti-war satire filled with extremely graphic violence and a fair share of nudity. The movie was controversial at its release for parents incorrectly thinking that it was something that they could take their kids to, similar to a Star Wars franchise. So it's all the more confusing that 2 years later, Johnny Rico and friends were back for a CGI kids show about the Roughnecks fighting more alien bugs. The violence was toned down, but it was clear that the show audience wasn't just for kids. Unfortunately, production difficulties led to the show being canceled before its planned conclusion, leaving the cult following it's acquired over the years to never have a proper conclusion to the series. Before we jump into our number 1 pick, a quick honorable mention to Jim Carrey, who in 1 year had not 1, not 2, but 3 Saturday morning cartoons based on his films. While every kid I grew up knew Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber by heart, in my older years I realized how generally inappropriate all those movies were to be aimed at kids. And now number 1, Toxic Crusaders. Quick story. My horror movie night co-host Matt Kelly loved the Toxic Crusaders cartoon series. One day he was at his uncle's house and he found a VHS of The Toxic Avenger and decided to watch it. The film terrified him, and now he's the biggest Troma fan I know. This is the danger of what can happen when you make cartoons out of non-kid-friendly sources. We don't need more Matt Kellys in our lives. There's been a fair share of inappropriate things that happen in the original source material of the other shows on this list, but Toxic Crusaders is the only cartoon series for kids based on a movie where a child's head gets smashed by a car tire, so it makes it far worse than the others. Toxic Crusaders has extremely humble origins of being an anti-pollution show, and while other shows on this list feel like soulless cash-ins, when you watch Toxic Crusaders, you can tell that the people behind Troma really did believe in the product and wanted to share a positive message to kids. The show also is extremely weird and featured amazing characters with even more amazing action figures that played out like a perfect marriage of Captain Planet and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. However, all the praise in the world cannot cover up the fact that Toxic Crusaders is based on Toxic Avenger, a film with smashed heads, ripped limbs, Nazi scientists, poked out eyeballs, ripped out guts, and more nudity than a late-night Cinemax film in 1998. Over the last decade, Lloyd Kaufman has been extremely open to wanting to bring more of the Toxic Crusaders into the Toxic Avenger movies, and we at Geekscape are hoping that one day we will see a practical effect version of No Zone.